Hello everyone, myself Michael Ravina, Associate Professor, Department of Computer Science and Engineering. The subject is CS3492 Database Management Systems. The unit is Transactions and the topic is Transaction Concepts and Asset Properties. Transaction. A transaction is a collection of operations that forms single logical unit of work. A simple transaction example. First, read your account balance. Then next, detect the amount from your balance. Next, write the remaining balance to your account. Read your friend's account balance, add the amount to his account balance, write the new updated balance to his account. This whole set of operations can be called a transaction. That means if you are reading, that means you are withdraw other, that means you can withdraw one amount from your bank account, then the updated balance becomes another balance. So this is a whole set of transaction. That means at first read your account balance, then detect money from your balance. After that, write the remaining amount. Then you can bring this amount into another account. That means read your friend's account, then add this amount. Add the amount to your friend's account, then update your friend's account. After that, the whole transaction is totally completed. That withdrawing one money and adding that money to another one account. This is the whole this set of whole process is called transaction. Transaction processing system. The system with large database and hundreds of concurrent users that are executing database transaction. For example, reservation system, banking system, these are the transaction processing system example. Then concurrent access. The concurrent access means multiple user accessing a system at the same time. That means single user, one user at a time that can use the system. Multiple user use the system at a time. It can be achieved by multi-programming. This is one of the important concept of the transaction. Concurrent access means multiple user accessing the same system at the same time. Next one is the parallel. Parallel means multi-user access different resources at the same time. Multiple users, that means this is an example. That means the time, same time, the time T1, T2 mentions the time. The time in the time T1, at the time T1, the transaction A and B are occurring. That means two users. For example, one user is A and another one user is B, means both are accessing the same. Otherwise, next both are using the system and they are different. That means A uses the CPU 1, B uses the CPU 2, but the time is same. Okay, next one is this is a parallel. Multi users access a different resources at the same time. Next one is a interleaved. Interleaved means multiple users access a single resource based on time. That means this is a diagram. For second diagram is the diagram for interleaved. Interleaved means at the time T1, the particular A transaction performs. After that time T1, then the T2 time. In the at the time T2, next transaction. Likewise, multiple users access the same resources are used by the multiple users. For example, in the time T1, between T1 to T2 to T2 and T3 to T4, same transactions are performed. Okay, this is a multiple users access single resource based on the time. next one is the transaction concept. The next transaction concept, the transaction access data. That means we have to transact any amount. That means withdraw and add money from your account or other withdraw from your account. Add money to your account and withdraw money from your account. These are performed by using only two operations. First one is the read operation, then second one is the write operation. Read means it transfers data item X from the database to a local buffer. That means already the available content in the database is read by the user. The buffer, that means the X from the read the transfer data item, that means read the data item X from the database to the local. When you are reading the data from your database, the value read from the database and they are loaded into the local buffer belonging to the transaction that executed the read operation. Then write means it transfers the data item from the local buffer to the transaction database. Okay, that is write back to. What are the items are readed? They are, suppose if you are updating these readed item, then they are returned by the write operation. Then next one is the important concept of transaction properties. That means ACID properties. The transaction properties are known as to ensure the integrity of data during a transaction. The database system maintains the four following properties. First one is the atomicity, then second one is the consistency, then third one is the durability, fourth one is the isolation. Atomicity is this property states that a transaction must be treated as an atomic unit, that is either all of its operations are executed or none. There must be no state in the database where a transaction is left partially completed. State should be defined either before the transaction of the execution of a transaction or after the execution or abortion or failure of a transaction. Next is the consistency. Consistency means the database must remain in a consistent state after any transaction. No transaction should have any adverse effect on the data residing in the database. If the database was in the consistent state before the execution of transaction, it must remain consistent after the execution of all transaction as well. Durability. Durability is the database should be durable enough to hold all its latest updates even if the system fails or restarts. If a transaction updates a chunk of data in a database and commits, then the database will hold the modified data. If a transaction commits but the system fails before the data could be returned onto the disk, then that data will be updated once the system springs back into action. Isolation. A database system where more than one transaction are being executed simultaneously and in parallel. The property of the isolation states that all the transaction will be carried out and executed as if it is the only transaction in the system. No transaction will affect the existence of any other transaction. States of transaction. That if you are doing any transaction, it contains the following states. First one is the begin state, then second one is the first the transaction is begin, then it goes to the active state. In the active state, the transaction is being executed. This is the initial state of every transaction. Then second one is the partially committed state. Partially committed means when a transaction executes its final operation, it is said to be partially committed state. Failed means a transaction is said to be in failed state if any of the checks made by the database recovery system fails. A failed transaction can no longer proceed further. Aborted, if any of the checks fails and the transaction has reached a failed state, then the recovery manager rolls back all its write operation on the database to bring a database back into the original state where it was prior to the execution of the transaction. Next one is the committed transaction. If a transaction executes all its operations successfully, it is said to be committed. All its effects are now permanently established on the database system. These are the that means this is the first active. If it is in the system is active state, then the transaction is being executed. Partially committed means when the transaction in the final operation, then it is in the final partially committed. Failed means the system failed in any state if any checks are made by the database recovery. Then aborted state means that to restart the transaction, the database recovery model can select any of the two operations after the abort that means to restart the transaction, otherwise to kill the transaction. Next one is the final one is a committed transaction. If the transaction executes all its operations successfully, then it is states committed.